Hello everyone and welcome to my review of episode 6 from The Witcher show on Netflix. If you'd like to see any of the previous ones, you can check the link to the playlist down in the description. Also, be warned, because there may be all kinds of big spoilers in this video. First off, let me start by saying that this story is one of my favorite parts of the book series, and I got really excited when this episode started and Borch showed up. By the way, they pronounce it Borch here, I think.
I am Borch, 3 jackdaws.
And Borch in the audiobooks. But anyway, so when he showed up with his Zerrikanian companions, I couldn't wait to see more. And I have to admit that my expectations were a little higher than what we actually got, but I'll go over it and share my thoughts regardless. Should we talk about the way they look? I didn't expect Borch to be as old as he's shown here, but he does make a reference to his old age early on in the episode, and so I'm fine with that. I appreciate the fact that they addressed it.
One final first before I'm too old to do anything but die.
Also, I wonder why they didn't put the iconic 3 black birds on his clothing. I know they removed the part where they explain what his name, like his real draconic name, Villain Trettenmerth, or whatever it was, means, but I think they should have still had the birds. As for Thea and Vea, and by the way, they don't make it clear in the show, I don't think, but these are actually not their real names. They are just oversimplified versions of them, because the actual ones are difficult to pronounce for northerners. So, they're not literally as they are described, but the key thing for them is to appear foreign, and that comes across, so I'm satisfied. Then we go to the tavern, and in the books we had an absolutely amazing, morally philosophical exchange between Geralt and Borch, where they discussed the nature of monsters, order and chaos, good and evil, myth and reality, and what causes people to invent them, and so on, and it was just great. Part of it feels a little introductionary, and this is likely because the story is in fact the very beginning of the second book. But it's done in such a way that it never felt boring, at least not to me. Quite the opposite, in fact. Now, I do understand why they didn't include the ending of that sequence in the show, where both girls seem quite interested in having sex with Geralt, and Borch asks him to pick one. That would have been problematic, I suppose, and I don't care too much about necessarily having that. But the part that preceded it was pure gold, and perhaps there's not enough time for it here. Ultimately, not a bad job, but I just feel like I was a little spoiled by the books. Then we meet the rest of the dragon hunting crew, along with Yarpen.
Leaves plenty of time for me to pet and drool!
I always had his image from the second game in my mind.
By the milk of Mother Creatrix's tits, Geralt of Rivia!
But I must say, Netflix version is just as good. There's a nice part with him in the third book, I hope we get to see that. There's also a good exchange between Yen, Geralt and Dandelion.
I'd say something strange was afoot, but then again, witches are bound to bump into monsters eventually.
Yes, you.
Yennefer.
The crow's feet and you.
Yeah, well, your jokes are old.
And basically it's all good until Sir Eyck of Denesle shows up, or however you pronounce his name and location. In the show, he is a joke. He may be the worst part of this episode for me. I can see how people who haven't read the books or haven't played Thronebreaker The Witcher Tales may be somewhat okay with him, treat him as a brief comedic relief and move on, but I simply can't. In The Witcher Tales game, he was a zealot who would frown upon the idea of sparing monsters or disrespecting his faith, but at the same time, he was also a likable and memorable character. He had some of the best lines in the game, I think. While here, he's an absolute buffoon and a disgrace, really.
The good book says the world is a garden which the gods once conferred upon man. And we men have this garden neglected. In consequence, all manner of filth has made its lair here. My tankard holds but milk of the goat.
Milk?
The shadow of spirits obscureth light most true, and leadeth thee from the path of virtue.
But I hear you say that he's based on the books and not Thronebreaker. Well then, they should have at least let him have his moment in the end, you know, with the dragon, but they killed him off prior to that for no real reason. Well, for fun, I guess.
Who slits a man's throat while he's relieving his bowels?
I think his portrayal is literally the worst of both worlds. He wasn't even funny to me. Okay, moving on. Now, in the trailer reaction videos I did some time ago, we talked a lot about this giant thing in the comments, and I think the top 3 suggestions were that this is either the Memorial of Sodden, Stregabor's Tower, and my personal favorite, a giant place of power. So we speculated a lot, and it turns out that it's just a big rock, I guess? Also, someone should balance out the volume in this episode.
What are you doing here, Yen?
I'm here with my escort, noble Sir Eyck of Denesle.
Then we cut to Ciri asking Doppler Ermion various questions, like where's Geralt?
Questions.
Perhaps she should have asked the writers. Moving on to the scene where Dandelion asks the Zerrikanians why they follow Borch. It's nice that they included it, but it feels kind of wasted. And that is because they decided to remove the payoff from that scene later on. See, in the books, Geralt, not Dandelion, asks one of them the same question. You know, he's like, why do amazing warrior women like you follow this weird guy? She cannot speak the language very well, and the only words she's able to come up with are, he is the most beautiful.
He is the most beautiful.
And then Geralt kind of chuckles and thinks how he'll never understand what women see in some men or something. But later on, when Borch turns into this absolutely magnificent golden dragon, Geralt is stunned at the sight of him. And then when they part ways, he calls after that same woman again and, still in awe, says, he really is the most beautiful. But anyway, they have none of that later on. Then we have a scene where they talk about Nilfgaard. First off, Yennefer says that they are a joke because they have Fringilla.
With Fringilla as his mage. Nilfgaard's a joke.
Not very nice. Then Yarpen claims that Nilfgaard will take over the north, listing the different realms and ending with Sintra, which has some dramatic effect on Geralt, and it's a nice touch, I think, because it is an addition to the books, if I'm not mistaken. And it works well in conjunction with some other additions they made earlier on, prior to this episode, so it's all good. However, I can't help but feel like they sacrificed a bit of geographical accuracy in favor of drama here, since Sintra, the one mentioned last, is actually the closest realm to Nilfgaard, and it does fall first. Then Borch somehow knows about the whole Fringilla versus Yennefer thing that took place in Aretuza decades ago, and I think Yennefer should have been a little more suspicious.
Someone killed that self-righteous bud, and it wasn't any of us.
Well, Yarpen, if it's not you, maybe it's the Reavers.
Did you kill Eyck?
It was the Reavers.
Thank you, Yen. And I hate to repeat myself from last episode, but again, the notion that a dragon heart will make her organs spawn from thin air? They should have kept the original explanation for infertility. It made much more sense.
What could you possibly want with a child?
They took my choice. I want it back.
What the sandwich fuck is this?
Who is they? Who took your choice? You actually had an opportunity to choose something else with Istrid.
We can be together, we can forge a whole new destiny.
It's not destiny. It's slow suicide.
And you chose not to. Then later on, the fashion guru didn't want to do it either, but you chose to phallically manipulate him?
Did they already have your cock?
And now they took your choice away?
The people who made us, they made us sterile for a lot of reasons. One of the kinder ones, because this lifestyle isn't suited to a child.
I mean, I get it that it sounds emotional on the surface, but to suggest that there is some actual intent behind the sterility of witchers and sorceresses, and especially to say that the intent is that this lifestyle is not suited for children? I don't know.
You have a child surprise. Isn't that rich?
Yes, it's very rich. An actual princess.
Did you miss the cold too?
Yes, very much.
Except you have arthritis. You hate the cold.
Okay, how does this happen? I thought he knew everything about Ermion. Didn't he say something like that in the previous episode?
Everything you've ever done, ever debated, ever dreamed is in our head now. Even this morning, when you thought to take your life.
I guess this could be explained by saying that he's just so fed up with these two that he doesn't even want to try, but then he just comes across as being bad at his job. And also, what's going on here? Dara is asking him questions, but Ciri suddenly has an urge to answer them instead of him.
Where are you taking us? Who wants them?
The man with the winged helmet.
Why is he going to so much trouble?
I'm special. I don't know how or why, but there's something inside me.
So they argue over whether they should kill him or not, and everything goes wrong, and we go back to Geralt. Was this in the books? I can't remember, so he enters a small tent, and it's actually huge and full of cool stuff. It has to be magic. Now, what follows is a scene where Geralt and Yennefer stare at one another, each of them waiting for the other to propose a round of Gwent. Also, I still prefer Renfri's romance theme. That one was on point.
How can I help you, handsome?
I'm looking for a whore.
Yennefer does some magic, and then she's mean to the Zerrikanians.
Get back.
You should have stayed dead.
And we have the Golden Dragon show up. He does not look quite as magnificent as I expected from the books, but I reckon that's due to budget limitations. In the original, he also gets into a lot more action, but here he just takes on one guy, and that's it. Fringilla lifted a rock, and her hand died, but now Yennefer held these dwarves in place for an hour or something, while dual-wielding and beating 10 dudes at once, and she's perfectly fine. Yes, I suppose she's far more powerful now than she was back then.
The sorceress will never regain her womb.
Yes, thank you for finally telling her. So they argue and they split up, and that is basically, in a nutshell, what Geralt and Yennefer's relationship is in the books. So Yennefer is gone, and now Geralt has to move on with his life, of course with the help of characters such as Shani, Triss, that friend of Dandelion's whose name I can't recall, Coral, Mosaic, or however it's pronounced, Fringilla Vigo, lots and lots of Fringilla Vigo actually. But first he blames it all on Dandelion.
Why is it whenever I find myself in a pile of shit these days, it's you?
And we cut back to Ciri running away and being caught by a man in handsome armor. She's taken to Kair, but oh wait, it's not Ciri but the Doppler. And he's mad because Kair didn't tell him about the fact that Ciri is special. But wait a minute, wasn't he supposed to know what Ermion knows? I mean, the thing about Ciri is like the most important thing Ermion knew. How could he not know it? But then he turns into Kair and he knows what Kair knows, I think.
Do you really believe all this nonsense in your head?
Okay, so they fight and the Doppler escapes. And we see that real Ciri had been tied to a tree this whole time. But then she escapes as well and argues with Dara, who was somewhere this whole time? Unconscious, perhaps? Anyway, they argue and they part ways and the Doppler is nowhere to be seen. And what was his actual plan? He hears what Ciri says, so he catches her and ties her up in the woods, then transforms into her in order to get himself captured and hopefully taken to Kair at an opportune moment to kill him, right? Because Kair did not pay him enough to bring someone special as Ciri, perhaps? And then, provided that he's successful, go back and pick Ciri up and do what? Sell her for more money to Nilfgaard? Was that his plan? I don't know. Couple this with the inconsistencies at Brokilon and him not knowing things about Ermion and about Ciri that I think he should have known. The whole Doppler plot seems quite pointless, really. It literally achieves nothing. Ciri and Dara already argued at Brokilon. They could have separated there. I guess the whole point of it was to show that Kair kills a bunch of people here? Kair should eventually end up being the good guy, unless they decide to change that. And this whole massacre here seems kind of uncharacteristic. I mean, Fringilla was right. If none of these people were really trying to escape, why didn't he just fetch the silver glass? Maybe that way he could have actually captured the Doppler and, learned what he knew? So I really don't know what the point of the whole thing was, but you can basically remove it and hardly anything important will change at all. And speaking once again of Kair and Fringilla, the show is portraying them as a little extra evil, as I said in the previous episode, and now Nilfgaard too in general seems to be almost like a cult. Not sure if I like it, but we'll have to wait and see where this goes.
And we will spread his supremacy all through the kingdoms, whether they deserve it or not.
So yeah, that was all I think. Once again, this was among my favorite parts of the books, and also one of my least favorite episodes. But I'd like to hear what you thought about it, and everything I commented on. Also, thank you very much for watching, special thanks to my supporters on Patreon and my YouTube members, and until the review of the next episode, stay tuned and be good.
No, that's exactly what we're looking for.
Dwarf. Never suspected he'd be so humble.